Alpha Fantasy Sports presents Fantasy Fire.
Hey guys, welcome to the first podcast of Alpha Fantasy Sports. I'm Matthew Maurer, and today we're going to talk about tight ends. It's the one position that many people struggle with the most in fantasy football, and it's often, I would say, the most underlooked position in fantasy football because there's so few great options out there if you're a fantasy owner. I mean, pretty much if you're not getting Rob Gronkowski or Jimmy Graham or Travis Kelce, Greg Olsen, after that, pickings start to get slim and people get frustrated. And more times than not, those people will just have to stream tight ends. We're going to take a look at some guys that I think you'll be able to grab in key spots in the draft. Go over some of the rankings that I've seen. Ron Gronkowski undoubtedly will be the number one tight end off the board. There's been some rumbling of people taking him in the first round. I think that's a little bit of a high price tag for him, but that's definitely where Rob Gronkowski will be going. If you can get Gronkowski, you are literally getting a wide receiver put at the tight end position, and you more than likely will, at least at that position, have an advantage over just about anybody you play. After that, Jimmy Graham is a guy that many people still peg as a top 3 fantasy option, and I get it. You look at his resume, you look at what he did with Drew Brees, and you say, okay, it's got to translate. I don't know if it does. I actually picked Jimmy Graham as a guy that I think will be a bust. Not a bust in a traditional sense, but a bust in the fact that I don't know if he'll live up to the rankings and to where everybody has him right now. I mean, everybody has him, I would say, either the second or fourth tight end, second or third tight end, I'm sorry. And I don't know if I agree with that. I think in Seattle, the touchdowns should continue. I think he'll get 9 to 10 touchdowns. The yardage is really what made Jimmy Graham special when he was in New Orleans. Drew Brees keyed up on him, did very well getting Jimmy Graham the ball in the open field. I don't know if Russell Wilson possesses that. And I've heard some people say Russell Wilson never had these kind of weapons in Seattle. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, you're talking about a guy who had Golden Tate there for years. And I know what people are going to say. Well, Golden Tate, when he was there, Russell Wilson was a rookie or he wasn't the same. Yeah, I hear you. But Golden Tate goes to Matthew Stafford and becomes fantasy relevant. I mean, pretty much during that time frame, he really wasn't a guy that you could start on your fantasy team and get points when he was with Seattle. Now he's probably going to be a wideout 2 or wideout 3 in many leagues, and take it for a grain of salt or whatever. But let's be honest, Seattle Seahawks wide receivers aren't exactly guys that you'll pick up this year in the fantasy draft. And that's what I tell people who believe that Russell Wilson doesn't have options. Russell Wilson has decent wide receivers there in Seattle. Russell Wilson's just not that kind of a QB. Now, a tight end, he could do very well. I mean, we look at what Michael Vick did in the Atlanta Falcons in his early days with Alge Crumper. Certainly a guy like, Russell Wilson, and I'm not comparing Russell Wilson's skill set to Michael Vick, but I am saying that Russell Wilson is a guy that you look at and you say, okay, the playing style may not be identical, but there are some tendencies there that they share. Russell Wilson's definitely the better quarterback between the two during the time frame, but without question, let's be honest, there's some similarities there. After that, Greg Olsen, who I think is going to do well this year. Cam Newton's back. They get Devin Funchess in the draft. You get the second-year maturation of Kelvin Benjamin. There are certain things there that he's going to have the benefit of. And Cam Newton being better this year, I think, speaks volumes for Greg. Greg has always been a guy that has been among the tight ends you want to grab if you can't get the top tier guys. I wouldn't be surprised if Greg Olsen becomes a top tier guy this year. Last year, he certainly was. This year, it would not surprise me if Greg Olsen finishes 2 or 3 in the tight end rankings. He's got a lot of skills, and he gives you some really good production based on where you can get him in the draft. And I think, again, this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see Greg Olsen start to fly off the boards in the late 4th, 5th, or 6th rounds. That's probably going to be the sweet spot for him. If you can grab some other skill positions and then grab a Greg Olsen, I think you're going to do well off. To me, Jimmy Graham's probably going to go in the first 4 rounds. Ditto for Travis Kelce, and probably Gronkowski's going to go in round 1. So after that, you really need to start identifying where the value picks are. A guy like Greg Olsen doesn't have the love that Travis Kelce, Jimmy Graham, and Rob Gronkowski has. And therefore, I think he's a very viable option in the mid part of the draft. And for that, I'd start to target him if you feel more comfortable spending those early picks on skill positions. Another option for a lot of fantasy guys out there would be Delanie Walker. You talk about underappreciated. This guy put in a tremendous season this past year and literally was virtually ignored by everyone. No one had Delanie Walker as a top 10 tight end, but that's what he finished as. I had him last year on my team, for example, and I had Gronkowski, and then I had Delanie Walker backing up that position because, let's face it, Gronkowski is an injury risk, and Delanie Walker was there. And Delanie Walker there were some weeks where Delanie Walker had more production than Gronkowski. So if you can get Delanie Walker, who I think's price tag is going to be in the 7th or 8th round, I think that bodes well for you. Ditto for guys like Julius Thomas, who I think is going to have a down year just from the simple standpoint of the lack of, let's be honest, the lack of development in Jacksonville. People talk about Jacksonville's wideout Allen Robinson. People talk about Blake Bortles and what he represents, but people fail to understand that Jacksonville Jaguars aren't a good team. They're not a good team defensively. The O-line, while promising, has not developed to the point yet where Blake Bortles is going to be off his back. There are certain things there in Jacksonville that a lot of people put out there, and certainly for whatever reason, look at these guys and say, oh, pick a Jacksonville guy up. I don't know if I'd want to do that. I don't know if I want to pick up Blake Bortles in the draft. I don't know if I want to pick up TJ Yeldon. I don't know if I want to pick up Allen Robinson. These are guys that I think Allen Robinson I probably would pick up at some point in the draft, but I wouldn't target him. And that's the thing about Julius Thomas. I think he'll do well in Jacksonville. Will he do Denver Bronco well? No, I mean, last year he was going in the 4th or 5th round. This year, I don't see that for him. I think he'll get a lower ADP, but I still think he has the kind of buzz name that will make some GMs take earlier picks on him than they probably should. But if he falls, say, round 7, 8, that's a guy I target. Jordan Cameron is another guy. He's going to Miami Dolphins. That offense has been quietly bubbling with the transition of Ryan Tannehill into being a tangible fantasy option. Lamar Miller. There's some really promising options there. Jarvis Landry. I think Jordan Cameron's going to do well there. I mean, you see the kind of production he put up with the Cleveland Browns despite the bad quarterback play, or the inconsistent quarterback play. I just really like Jordan Cameron. I think that's a guy that you can definitely target at some spots. I believe in most mocks that I've seen, Jordan Cameron goes about round 9 or round 10. That's a guy that you definitely could target that you might be able to get. Josh Hill from the New Orleans Saints. He's an unknown commodity. We don't know how well he'll do. We don't know to what extent will the New Orleans Saints have him in their offense. We don't know anything right now. All we know is Jimmy Graham's gone and Josh Hill replaces him. So he's kind of a guy that you might take a flyer on in round 10, 11, and just hope that this is a guy that could start to show some payoff for you later on in the season. Max Williams is another guy. Dennis Pitta is, let's face it, injury prone. And Max Williams, they spent a decent early pick in the draft last season to get him. He's a rookie, and with rookie tight ends, you just never know. Look at Eric Ebron. This guy was pegged by some people to be a top 8 fantasy tight end, and instead he's a guy that you just look at and say, Austin Seferian-Jenkins is an interesting option for a lot of fantasy guys. He has all the physical gifts. He's on a bubbling team offensively that just drafted Jameis Winston. They have Mike Evans on the outside, Vincent Jackson. So there are some key things there for Seferian-Jenkins. And I like where he's going in most drafts. He's going later on too. You start to see him in round 9 or round 10 in some fantasy leagues. He's definitely a guy that you might want to take a flyer on. Vernon Davis, I know it frustrated a lot of fantasy owners last year with Vernon Davis. I mean, here was a guy that has been fantasy viable for years, and literally last season he was on a milk carton. And I know it upset a lot of GMs because, hey, let's face it, in fantasy football, nothing's worse than drafting the bust of the year. But I think some of that had to do that the San Francisco 49ers needed him in blocking formations a lot. I don't think Colin Kaepernick played well last season. So there were definitely some contributing issues that made Vernon Davis's production very questionable. Hopefully, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt throughout his entire NFL career that this is a bounce back year for him. How strong of a bounce back? Well, that's debatable. But do I think he could be a guy that could finish, say, 10th or 11th in fantasy tight end options at the end of the year, the rankings? Absolutely. A guy that you're going to start to probably hear some rumblings from come August, that right now is going 13th, 14th in many mock drafts, is Virgil Green, the tight end for the Denver Broncos. This is a guy that has a lot of promise. I know Denver right now, the tight end spot is very cloudy, but I really like Virgil Green's resume and what he's done. He's a guy that I know a lot of people are looking at Owen Daniels and they're saying that's probably going to be all him, but I don't know. The thing about Peyton Manning is he looks for certain things from tight ends, and guys like Owen Daniels, I don't know if that's the guy that we're going to get. I mean, I remember Peyton Manning first went to the Denver Broncos. Everybody and their mama thought Jacob Tamme was going to be a huge star for them. And instead, a guy like Julius Thomas comes out. Peyton Manning really likes to get athletic tight ends involved. Owen Daniels is on his way out. Virgil Green is a guy that I think you have to look at and say he does fit the bill. There are things about him that I just think are going to start to pay off. Virgil Green has a lot of Julius Thomas in him, more than Owen Daniels. And for that, I think Peyton Manning will start to target him a little bit. Being that we went through those, of course, you can get guys like Tyler Eifert or Charles Clay, Jason Witten, Martellus Bennett. These are Antonio Gates. These are all relevant options. I think you know what you're going to get from those guys. However, the guys I covered are guys that you're either going to get later on in the draft, or they're going to be guys that, you know, have a potential to do something. I don't know how many people will take guys like Martellus Bennett. And Martellus Bennett last year was an interesting option. I mean, you kept waiting for the slowdown. It never came. And Martellus Bennett in the past has been a lot like Dustin Keller when he used to play for the New York Jets. He'd be a ridiculous tight end for the first 3-4 weeks. And then after that, the fallout would occur. And you just wouldn't hear from him again. He literally would get 0 points for you. Jermichael Finley was another guy. Consistency for tight ends is, I think, very hard to get a guy that's going to come in, week out, and get you some points. Even if it's 5 or 6 points, it's points. And sometimes with guys like Martellus Bennett, guys that you know historically have been inconsistent, you do get a little worried. I mean, is this slowdown going to happen? Do I sell high? I mean, what are my options? And I think for a lot of fantasy owners, there are real questions surrounding guys such as Martellus Bennett and Antonio Gates, you got to wonder when Father Time will rear its ugly head. The guy that a lot of people have pegged as being somewhat relevant this year has been Zach Ertz. You got every article. You got some articles that suggest, he's an elite tight end in the making, and you have other articles that suggest stay away from Zach Ertz. Really, I'm on the fence for Zach Ertz. I think he's a boom or bust pick. I think at this point, he's a guy that you're either going to get great production from or you're never going to hear from him again. That's kind of the truth. I know that Chip Kelly has a great history with tight ends, and I don't dismiss any of that. But I do dismiss, Zach Ertz as a guy that, is going to be a fantasy option. I certainly think he's a streaming tight end. I certainly wouldn't mind him or a Tyler Elfert in a streaming situation. But would I want to have a Zach Ertz type tight end on my team? Absolutely not. I don't know anybody who would want to have a tight end that is inconsistent. And I just feel at this point in Zach Ertz's career, whether it's the offense, whether it's the confidence that maybe the quarterback has in him, he just has not been very relevant at all. So I don't like inconsistent fantasy players. And with that, I just can't pick them up. If you go past tight ends and you start to look at some of the other things that go on in fantasy football, there's one other position that has been just the incredibly crazy in terms of the prognostication of who's going to be great and who's going to be poor and who's going to have a bounce back year, who's going to have a breakout year, who's going to have a bust year, and that's running back. I mean, running back is literally, I would say, one of the most critiqued and often wrong analyzation of players. I've seen every type of article you can think about. I've seen why you should draft Lamar Miller. I've seen why you shouldn't draft Lamar Miller. I've seen why you should trust Mark Ingram. I see why you shouldn't trust Mark Ingram. I mean, basically, just about with every player, with every flip of the coin, there is a guy there that will tell you why you shouldn't take him, and then there's another guy there that will tell you why you should take him. Running back, to me, is one of those positions that it's the lifeblood of fantasy football. And with the running back situation being the way it is, meaning guys are getting less reps, guys are needing to start to catch the ball out of the backfield more as more teams go to a more passing offense. There is no time like there is currently ever in NFL history where running backs are being, in some instances, minimized. Adrian Peterson, he comes back. I think he's going to have a great year. Wouldn't not surprise me if he's the number one running back this year. He does carry some risk. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he was basically removed from football for a little bit of while he had his legal problems. But, I mean, he's also getting up there in age. I mean, he's 29. He's a guy that you're going to have to start looking at. I mean, then there's Frank Gore. I mean, this guy just seems to just every year in, year out, he just seems to never die out. You keep waiting for Frank Gore to regress, and you keep waiting for him to not be a fantasy option, and yet it never happens. I mean, here's a guy that, for all intents and purposes, every year he's a viable option, despite the fact that he's getting on there in age. Latavius Murray, here's another guy who you like his production sometimes, and other times you look at it and you go, I don't know. I mean, let's be honest. Latavius Murray's hype has literally been created over 2 games. It is not a situation where Latavius Murray is a guy who, a 600-yard rusher or a 700-yard rusher, and now people are looking at him to go to the next level. Latavius Murray, for all intents and purposes, is a guy that 2 games occurred, and people are now looking at him and saying, that's the problem with Latavius Murray. There's a lot to like there, and there's also a lot to not like, because when you look at times where he's gotten consistent carries, the numbers have been inconsistent. And with the Oakland Raiders being who they are, you just got to feel that defenses will key in on Latavius Murray. They're going to probably, limit him somewhat and make Derek Carr beat him through the air, which is definitely a viable option for them, especially if Amari Cooper lives up to his advanced billing. But, Latavius Murray is a guy I would approach with caution. I don't know if I want to take a Latavius Murray before round 3. There's just a lot there that I don't know if I want to take a chance on. I'm not a big, and here's the thing, I'm not a big chance guy. I don't like to take chances on players that don't have a history of development. I mean, look at C.J. Anderson. This guy was literally a third string running back. He comes in and now most drafts that I've seen him go, he's a top 10 pick. So I don't know if I want to take a C.J. Anderson. I just don't know. Certainly he should develop, but certainly he's in an offense that, let's be honest, can put up some numbers through the air. So do I want C.J. Anderson? I don't know. I don't know if I want to take that pick. I might be happy with an Eddie Lacy or Adrian Peterson or a Le'Veon Bell or Arian Foster, Marshawn Lynch. Those are guys that I probably would target. I don't know if I'd want to get those guys that other people have and develop that. If there is a guy that I would probably take a risk on, would be Joseph Randle from the Dallas Cowboys. With that offensive line, I think the smart money would be on Joseph Randle. That's a guy that I would probably take a real look at taking a jump on in maybe round 4. Joseph Randle's a guy I might gives you a lot of options. And, if he holds true and that offensive line stays as legitimate as it is, that's a great option for you. I'm a little bit on the fence like Mark Ingram. I like the resume. I like what he's done, but I also don't like some of the carries that he needs. I just don't know how much the New Orleans Saints are going to let him run. I mean, last year he got the ball in tons with Drew Brees slowing down a little bit, and with the disappearance, or should I say disappearance, but the free agent loss of Jimmy Graham. Sure, Brandon Cooks might come in and really give you some great production, and I think he will. Certainly, Mark Ingram looks like a guy that could get the ball and could get it in spades. If that happens, year in and year out, the thing about fantasy that always cracks me up is the emergence of handcuffs. And I get it. You take some players, you need to get handcuffs. But when you start going really high in round 5 or 6 for a handcuff option, I just think that's a really horrible price to pay to grab a guy. I mean, look at Jamal Charles, for example. I love Jamal Charles in that he's a guy that can get you really good points really fast with limited carries. He doesn't need 20 carries to produce. He just does. But he's been injury prone. And a guy like Knile Davis, you almost have to will yourself to take in round 6. Most people are ranking Knile Davis in the top 30 of running backs. I don't know if I want to take that. It's almost like the situation with Arian Foster and Brandon Tate, where you're going to have to jump on his backup quite early. Ditto for Arian Foster again this year. Alfred Blue is a guy that you're going to have to grab. You just are. If you don't, you're going to suffer. And Alfred Blue is a guy that I don't want to waste a 8th or a 9th round draft pick. If I'm going to get a backup, I want a guy that is probably not going to be on most guys' draft boards until round 9, round 10. That's just what I think I'd want to waste a handcuff pick on. A guy like Jamal Charles, that handcuff ADP is just way too high. I don't want it. And I imagine most fantasy players, you got to feel somewhat skeptical to go grab a guy like that. I look at the numbers and I know people are going to say DeMarco Murray is a great option. I don't believe DeMarco Murray is a great option at all. I think DeMarco Murray is a guy that a lot of guys are starting to try to, fan the flames of, well, he got all this production last year. You guys are crazy and you guys are not respecting his talent. That's hogwash. everybody respects what DeMarco Murray did last year. Everybody in the league. He got offensive player MVP. Every fantasy GM across the nation thanked the basketball guy. The football gods that they got DeMarco Murray. There was nobody looked at DeMarco Murray's production and said he's a terrible player. But 392 carries is a hell of a price that he put up last year. You look at the numbers historically, you're talking about a guy that's going to try to break history. 392 carries, that's a boatload of carries. And I think that's why Chip Kelly went out and grabbed Ryan Matthews in free agency to back up DeMarco Murray, because he knows he's got to know that those numbers are, career threatening for a running back. Do the history. There's numerous articles about this. This isn't anything crazy or weird. There's numerous articles about it. DeMarco Murray is a scary proposition this year. 392 is a lot of carries, and it's been known to ruin some running backs. And whether people want to be honest or not about it, I don't really care. If you want to take them in the first 12 picks, you go right ahead. I won't touch DeMarco Murray. I won't touch DeMarco Murray in the first 2 rounds. Call me crazy. Call me whatever. But there's enough red flags on DeMarco Murray where I'd rather somebody else take that chance. And listen, if DeMarco Murray comes out and he has a great year this year, which is to me, a great year for DeMarco Murray this year would be 1,200 to 1,400 yards. If he was to get that kind of year, that would be tremendous. I don't think he'll get the numbers he got last year in Dallas. Whether people want to discredit DeMarco Murray or they want to undercredit that offensive line is a juggernaut at Dallas, and no one's going to convince me that he's not going to miss running behind that. Philadelphia Eagles don't have a bad offensive line. They just don't have a all-time great offensive line. The Dallas Cowboys are in the process of having an all-time great offensive line, and I think that's why the Dallas Cowboys were so comfortable letting DeMarco Murray go. I don't know if they believe that he's doesn't have the value, but let's be honest. As I said before earlier in this podcast, running backs are being phased out in some teams and phased in others. But for the most part, running backs are being minimized their roles in most offenses. DeMarco Murray is a guy that's going to go to Philly. He's going to get every benefit of the doubt. He's going to start. I just don't know if I like a running back that just, like I said, ran the ball 392 times. That's a lot. That's a lot of wear and tear on those tires. And for that, I'll pass. Marshawn Lynch, he's a guy that's getting a little older. You kind of waiting for him to start to regress. Father Time waits for no one and is undefeated. And Marshawn Lynch is a guy that you got to think, okay, maybe this could be the year where you see a decrease in production. Last year, he was actually better than he was in 2013. Which speaks volumes for him, despite him holding out a little bit. Jonathan Stewart is a guy that I just can't, for the life of me, fathom why so many people want to value him so high. This guy, granted, he does not have a lot of wear and tear because he's basically been in a split carry situation for 5-6 years. But you're not going to convince me that this guy who had a couple great games is now ready to be an elite back. I can't sink my teeth into that. It's a bite that I just can't make. I think Jonathan Stewart, depending on where you get him, does give you great value. But the production, for all his yardage, he got 3 touchdowns. People have to understand, if you're only going to get 3 touchdowns rushing the ball, then you better be like Matt Forte, where you're catching the ball and you're putting up numbers. Matt Forte last year had a decent year. Wasn't spectacular, but with those 4 touchdown receptions and almost the 800 yards receiving, he more than made up despite the fact, if you look at Matt Forte's rushing numbers last year, it's 1,000 rush yards and 6 touchdowns. Okay, normally if you take a guy like that in the first round, you're upset. But when you throw in the 800 yards of receiving and you grab it 4 more touchdowns, you're talking about a guy basically for your fantasy team that put up 800 all-purpose yards and over 10 touchdowns. That's great production right there. I mean, you like that. So that's the thing with Jonathan Stewart. He's never been a guy that's been a receiving beast. He's been a guy that, runs the ball, carries. He's never really been in that role. I mean, that was kind of D'Angelo Williams' forte. I just don't know how well I want to waste that high of a pick on Jonathan Stewart. I mean, most leagues he's going by round 4. I don't know if I want him that early. Round 6, okay, I'm for that. But I just, the way he's getting hyped right now just scares me. I just got to be honest with you, it just scares me. I don't know if I really want to take that much of a risk. And then Darren McFadden is making a return in most rankings and in most ADPs. If you grab Joseph Randle, you need to grab Darren McFadden. I mean, this is a guy who will definitely get every opportunity to be healthy this year. I don't know if they're going to split carries. I imagine we'll find all this out in preseason. But for right now, it's going to be interesting to definitely watch and see what transpires with Darren McFadden. Well, guys, that's all the time I have today for you. This will be a weekly feature. We're going to try to get these out every Wednesday. I look forward to talking to you guys, and please leave subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check us out on our website, alphafantasy.com. Again, appreciate you listening to me, and talk to you soon. Matthew Maurer, signing out.